let me go straight to my points. What Dr. Regula has presented in her paper, I believe, falls into two subfields of modern ecclesiology: baptismal and critical ecclesiologies. These subfields elaborate upon and advance the ecclesiological approach that constituted a mainstream during the second half of the 20th century, namely the Eucharistic ecclesiology. This ecclesiology, Eucharistic ecclesiology, which has amounted to the identity of the Orthodox theology, was triggered by historical shifts that the Eastern Christian world experienced in the beginning of the last century, namely the collapse of the three empires in which Orthodox population lived, Russian, Ottoman, and Austro-Hungarian empires. These empires constituted the main framework for the Orthodox churches to understand themselves. With their collapse, new framework and new self-identification was needed. The Eucharistic ecclesiology emerged to play this role. Many Orthodox, especially those who immigrated to the West, began rationalizing themselves through Eucharistic communities. They might have believed, and many still believe, that Eucharistic ecclesiology is genuinely Orthodox, but the fact remains that it was adopted from the Catholic theology to a great extent. For example, Henri de Lubac, as early as in 1953, made his famous statement, "The Eucharist makes the Church." A pleiad of Orthodox theologians followed him, without always acknowledging the source of their inspiration. They included John Romanidis, Father John Romanidis, Metropolitan Callistus, and others. A protagonist of the Eucharistic ecclesiology was, of course, Father Nikolai Afanasiev, who considered the Eucharist as an essential feature of any ecclesial community, which for him constitutes the fundament of the Church. Metropolitan John Zizoulas has furthered the ideas of Father Afanasiev, and he is the main alive representative of the Eucharistic ecclesiology. Dr. Regula, I think, has tried to broaden the framework of Eucharistic ecclesiology by including to it the sacraments of initiation. Such approach has been suggested, for example, by Father John Erickson from St. Magnus Seminary, who suggested baptismal ecclesiology. Dr. Regula applies this sort of ecclesiology to tackle some issues pertinent to the real life of the Church, including the participation of laity and, more specifically, women. What she's trying to do, I believe, can be described as critical ecclesiology. Such an ecclesiology explores the gaps between what the Church is believed to be and what it is in the real life. A critical ecclesiology is emerging as central to the modern studies of the Church, especially in the wake of the ongoing war in Ukraine, I believe. It is questioning the romantic perception of orthodoxy, to which Eucharistic ecclesiology, by the way, has contributed. It questions even Eucharistic ecclesiology as an Orthodox identity. Moreover, and this is relevant to the topic of this conference, it questions synodality or sobornost as such an identity. In the wake of this, I'd like to pay a bit more attention to the ongoing war in Ukraine and how it is related to synodality and how it is related to the critical ecclesiology. Because I think there is a relation between these things. One would believe that we, the Orthodox, have so strong beliefs in synodality that such beliefs could help us to overcome, to deal, to tackle, to address the war in Ukraine in a very substantial and constructive way. Unfortunately, it has not happened. So our ideas about synodality stay away from the reality of the war, and we don't even try to apply them, honestly, to address this war from the theological, from the Orthodox perspective, from the perspective of our tradition. And I think this failure of synodality to address the war occurs on the level of the national churches and on the level of inter-Orthodox community. Let us take the Russian Orthodox Church, which is to a great extent complicit in this war. The Russian Church has developed very strong and really prominent synodal institutions, the institutions of Conciliarity. It has, for example, three types of synods, of councils: the so-called the local council, the council of bishops, and then a permanent council. council, in which only several bishops usually participate on a regular basis. In addition to that, recently a new institution was added to this nomenclature of the synodal institutions, the so-called interconciliar presence. Well, it sounds awkward, and it is a translation of the Russian notion, межсоборное присутствие, that is supposed to facilitate the existence of synodal institutions in the Russian Church in order to foster, in order to promote synodality. And that institution also epically failed to address the war. Moreover, we are witnessing how the existing synodal institutions actually cover up the war and enhance the rhetoric of the war. I believe this is an epic failure of the synodal institution in addressing the war. We can observe the same kind of failure on the inter-Orthodox level as well. Yes, there are singular voices of the churches, coming from the churches. I would like particularly to emphasize the voice of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, which has been outspoken about the war, has sent the clearest messages about the war, and with a special role of His Holiness Patriarch Bartholomew, he was really very clear about the war. Or other hierarchs like Archbishop Theodorus also made some very clear statements about the war. Otherwise, the war doesn't exist for many local Orthodox churches. One would expect the war to be discussed on the pan-Orthodox level, and it hasn't happened. For example, there was an opportunity to address the war in the pre-assembly, Orthodox pre-assembly, before the World Council of Churches, the General Assembly of the World Council of Churches in May on Cyprus. The good thing about the pre-assembly was that eventually the Orthodox met and enjoyed themselves. It was very clear that it was a celebratory kind of event. Yet, the war almost did not exist for that pre-assembly, unfortunately. It was an opportunity to address it, and it was really the high point of the war. And unfortunately, that conciliar kind of ecumenical event failed to address it. So I would like to bring this problem to our discussion, to this audience. And I think it is serious. I will be open to further discussions.
Okay, so this was Coliseum.